Hi, I'm Sean. I've been working on this workbench for the last few months and I wanted to share my results with you. This bench has been a couple years in the making. It was about 2 years ago that I first sketched this out. I had probably been thinking about it prior to that. And in that time frame, I did a lot of research from just different resources, but a lot of that research was on YouTube and seeing how other woodworkers and how other people built benches, made vices, and how they were using their benches. I found that to be an invaluable resource, and so I just wanted to share my process with you in hopes that maybe you might be able to gain some inspiration or ideas to apply to your own work. So I'm making two different videos about the bench. This video here is going to be more of a high-level summary, just kind of talking about the bench design, features and functions. It's designed to be relatively short and concise. If you're looking for more detail, if you'd like to see how the bench was built, I did make a second video that really just kind of tracks the steps in the process and how this bench actually came together from a pile of wood. So right off the top, let's talk about what the bench is and a couple of high-level things. So first of all, this is a relatively budget-conscious build. So the wood, all of this wood came from home centers. Your local home center, big box home center, you're going to be able to find all this material. The bulk of this material is southern yellow pine. It is primarily construction lumber. I did build vices, and the vice chops and some of the other components are hardwood, so I just use poplar because it's the least expensive. So let's start with the design. This is my interpretation of the Roubo bench, that French Roubo design. So I do have the legs. It's kind of hard to see here on the front. I do have leg vices on both legs, but the legs are mounted right at the front face of the bench. The tenons come up through the top of the table, giving it a lot of strength and rigidity. So one of the things that I did a little different though is I did create kind of an apron that follows all around the bench. So you'll see here on the front of the bench, and like I said, it kind of carries all the way around. It's about 7 inches thick. The bench top itself, the core part of the bench top, is only about 3 inches. So this does hang down below, and there's some mechanical reasons why I did it that way, and you'll see that when we talk about the vices. But it also kind of gives me the opportunity to just use some dog holes that I might be able to use a hold fast or just a peg to hold a short board in either of the leg vices if I'm working on the edge of a board that's shorter than or not long enough to get clamped up in both vices. As far as the size of the bench, it ends up 24 inches deep, just over 6 feet, so 72.5 inches wide, not counting the end vise. And it stands 35 inches off of the floor. And that's really, really close to the dimensions I was shooting for. I wanted 6 feet, 2 feet, 6 feet, and 34 3/4 was what I was shooting for in height, just because that sort of matches the height of my table saw and router table and a working height that I'm kind of accustomed to. So now that we've got the design and the size, then it's really just kind of building everything else out. Now, one of the things that I did that is also a little different, you probably can't see it just yet where the camera is positioned right now, but I do have an end vise down here on the right hand side, and then you can see the 2 leg vices that are on the front. So an obvious question is, why 3 vices? I put some thought, actually a lot of thought kind of went into that. And if you look at a lot of the commercially available benches, they will often have an end vise down on the right hand side and some kind of front or face vise on the opposite end down on the left front. And frankly, that actually, I like that design. And I've mimicked it here for the most part, but I added a third vise. So why did I add the third vise? Well, in this space that I have, as I mentioned a while ago, I do have this wall right here, and beyond that I've got a little knee wall. So this wall juts out from the corner here a good 5 or 6 feet, much wider than the bench. So if I've got a board down here that I'm working, maybe say on edge, maybe I'm using a hand plane and I'm planing down here using this vise, whether it's a leg vise or a front vise or some other design. What I was worried about was not finishing my cut strong moving into that wall. So I felt like I would hesitate through a cut and not really finish to try to prevent banging that plane into the concrete wall. So with that in mind, my real preference was having the vise down here. But then, does it make sense to have 2 vices really close together? And so I really kind of battled with that and went around and round and round and round with where I wanted to put those vices. So one of the challenges with vices on any bench, of course, is the cost. The vise hardware itself is usually one of the most expensive components in a bench build, regardless of design. But I did something a little different on this one that you're going to see in more detail here in a moment. And I actually threaded. I actually bought the tooling to thread dowels, and so I ended up making the vise screws myself. And so by doing that, it allowed me the incremental cost then, whether I made 1 vise or 3 vices, that incremental cost was really pretty low once I decided to go that route and kind of make my own components and hardware. So let's take a closer look at the vices. We'll start here with this one leg vise. Both of the leg vices are constructed the same way. I mentioned previously that I actually threaded the primary screws for these vices. And they started out as 1.5" dowels that then were threaded. And I used a router system, and if you want to see more details on how I accomplished that, check out that other video because it does demonstrate that. But essentially it's a very simple connection. I've got a hole bored in the leg. That hole is threaded all the way through, so it's a 4.5 inch, the leg's 4.5 inches thick, and it's threaded all the way through, so there's a lot of engagement for those teeth. So one of the things that is a little more unique is the bottom guide bar, or parallel guide, is also threaded. So let me show you the purpose of that. So I repositioned the camera so you can get a good look at the inside of the vise chop. And what I've got here is I've got a hole that's mortised in here. So we've got our threaded rod, and this is the lower parallel guide. And inside that, I've got this nut. And so the nut really replaces a more traditional peg system to help prevent racking and provide that fulcrum strength for a leg vise. So oftentimes a common design for this is you've got a square board that's mortised through the leg, much like this is, and then you've got a series of pegs in that, and you use that to help apply fulcrum strength and prevent the vise from racking. So in this case, what I've done is I've threaded the lower rod, and I've got a nut that just drops back in here in this mortise. So if I want the vise all the way up against here, it very simply just recesses back in here, and we're in good shape. So let's take a look at how this works in action. Okay, so I haven't worked out some of the squeaks in the vise. So far, I've been calling that character. But you'll see, get this tightened up here a little bit. Bring the nut up. Pretty close. Got the nut work, and we'll just tighten up the vise. and that's not going anywhere. Using 2 threaded rods, that is not my idea. I picked that up off of Wood Magazine. They did they've actually got a couple of workbench build videos out, and one of them featured a leg vise with a similar design. It was a hardware package, so it was steel hardware on both the upper and lower screws are steel. But once I saw that, it just kind of clicked. I thought, boy, if I'm going to be threading dowels, then I could repeat that process, and it works out really, really well. So let's take a look at the end vise. This vise is the full width of the bench, so it is 24 inches. And of course, when you have it that wide, one of the challenges that you're presented with is it wanting to twist and rack when you're using only one end of the other. Of course, the nice part about having the end vise that wide is you can use it from either side of the bench, from the front or the back. So I have threaded the parallel guides just like I did on the leg vise, and I've got a nut, hopefully you can see it over here, and it gets recessed back in. There's a mortise back here on the chop that'll hold it so it'll close up tight without protruding, but it's there that we can add, just like the leg vise, anywhere we need it along that rod. So we'll just tighten this up a little bit. We've got a little more character in this vise as well. We'll tighten up the nut. Now we've got that in locked down, and we'll just give this a good crank. And that board is not going anywhere. So that's how the vices are designed to work, and using and threading those parallel guides on both the end vise and leg vise. So from a construction standpoint, the end vise is attached to the bench just like the leg vices are. So I've got a whole board in the end, and so that apron is a pretty thick end cap. You can kind of see it, it's kind of dovetailed here. So this end, so there is a tenon all the way across the bench, except for on the outside edges. The outside edges, I've got these dovetails that help support and kind of give it a mechanical connection. So I'm not relying only on the glue to hold this portion on, especially since this end in particular is going to have a lot of clamping on it. But it's very simply just a hole board in the middle that's tapped all the way through. So I've got it's a little over 3 inches. It turns out to be about 3.5 inches that's tapped there to give me really good engagement with that primary screw. So the last real detail on the bench build is just the finish. I used pure tung oil. I added about 4 coats, just trying to bring it up. As you can see, it's just now beginning to kind of softly glisten or shine just a little bit. It doesn't have a film finish on it yet. There's not enough coats to bring it up to that. So it doesn't have that hard plasticky surface like a polyurethane or something. It is really nice and buttery smooth. So thanks for watching this video. Hopefully you found some inspiration or ideas that you can use in your own build. If you have any comments or questions or anything, feel free to drop those in the comments and I'll try to get back to you. And we will see you next time.